350 million years ago. The sweltering rainforest of the Carboniferous period. Before you is one of the most terrifying creatures that have ever lived on our planet. A giant millipede, over 2.5 meters long. A creature that looks like it came off the pages of a science fiction book, but it actually did exist. Perhaps it is just as well that it became extinct long before first humans appeared. A few 100 million years ago, the Earth was very different from what it is today. If we looked at it from space, we would not have seen the familiar outlines of the continents and oceans, because at that time, the entire landmass was one giant supercontinent called Pangaea. Nowadays, its fragments are in fact the continents, so familiar to us. Some of them merged to form single land masses, while the rest have changed when mountains and faults appeared. The shores of the ancient continent were washed by truly great oceans. The largest of these was the Panthalassa, which covered more than 50% of the planet. The other two, Tethys and Paleotethys, washed the eastern coast of Pangaea. Since oceanic crust changes much faster than continental crust, most of the rocks that made up the floor of these great oceans have long since dissolved into the planet's interior. It is thought that only parts of the seafloor in the Pacific Ocean still remember the touch of the waters of the Panthalassa. Pangaea at that time stretched across the planet from the northernmost latitudes to the southernmost latitudes and spanned a wide range of climatic belts. However, the general climate of our planet during this period was dry and cool, and the global sea levels were relatively low. Combined with a vast expanse of the supercontinent, this resulted in a continental or sharply continental climate reigning over much of Pangaea. It is characterized by low humidity and noticeable temperature variations. Cold winters with little snow alternated with hot, dry summers. Therefore, vast areas of Pangaea were lifeless, rocky deserts, and only along the equator and coast did there stretch strips of sweltering and humid equatorial forests with tree ferns, horsetails and lycopods, or tree-like mosses. Most of these plants are now extinct, leaving only a few relict species. It was at this time that huge deposits of coal were formed, which gave the period its name, the Carboniferous. Interestingly, with all the obvious benefits for humans, this phenomenon is in fact the consequence dating back to the global imbalance in the circulation of elements on our planet. The fact is that tree ferns did not yet have a developed root system, and bacteria of the Carboniferous had not yet learned to process the natural polymer lignin, the main component of their trunks. Therefore, trees felled by the wind or killed by old age formed vast, pretty much impassable debris, subsequently buried underwater or soil and slowly decomposing without oxygen or help from bacteria. Thus, deposits of coal were formed, which we still use today. This process was the basis for global change and transformation. The fact is that tree trunks, which were not able to decompose, trapped huge amounts of carbon. This caused carbon dioxide levels to drop and oxygen concentration to rise in the atmosphere, even though today's high-efficiency plants and blue-green algae were non-existent at the time. It was not a smooth process of rise and fall, but extremely irregular, inconsistent and contradictory dynamics. In this graph you can see how oxygen levels gradually increased from 15 to 30% over millions of years and then declined again. Nevertheless, for a long time, the oxygen content in the air was noticeably higher than today's levels. This factor was one of the keys to the emergence of truly giant insects. Another reason was the lack of competition from more advanced creatures. Vertebrates had only just begun venturing onto land, and it was at this time that the largest known insects, Meganeura, lived on Earth. Meganeura, an extinct genus of large insects. Period of existence, about 300 million years ago. Wingspan, up to 75 centimeters, which makes Meganeura the largest known insect. Weight, 100–150 grams, which is very small for such sizes and indicates a fragile physique and lightweight exoskeleton. The genus Meganeura was an order of the Protodonata related to modern dragonflies. Studies show that Meganeura was adapted to open habitats and was similar in behavior to today's faucons. It had large, compound eyes, indicating good vision, and sharp spikes on its tibiae and the ends of its legs, which functioned as a flying trap to capture prey. Also, modeling of the physiology of Meganeura shows that the body was very likely to overheat. This predator most likely favored fast but short flights, relying on reaction speed and lightning-fast darting movements when hunting. There is also a hypothesis according to which the respiratory system of these creatures was more advanced than that of most arthropods and relied on forced air injection into the tracheae. Some modern insects, such as moths or large beetles, also do this. Based on all these facts, we can conclude that Meganeura lived in open spaces near the shores of bodies of water, such as streams, rivers and lakes. Being carnivorous, they fed on other insects and possibly small vertebrates, using their spiky legs to grasp and hold their prey. While the wings of giant dragonflies swooshed in the air of the Carboniferous period, the land was inhabited by monsters of a very different weight category. In the vast sparse woodland near the water's edge, there lived perhaps the most terrifying arthropod in the long history of its biological type, the giant millipede Arthropleura. The analysis of a large number of fossil remains, as well as the trails left by these monsters found in the wet soil, shows that they could grow to a size of about 2.5 meters and a width of 50 centimeters. Also, based on modeling, it can be assumed that the mass of these giant millipedes was in the range of 50 to 100 kilograms. Emerging at the very beginning of the Carboniferous, Arthropleura evolved successfully throughout the period, thus becoming one of its hallmarks. The location of the sites of known finds suggests that these creatures favored shallow waters and equatorial coasts. Based on this and a few other facts, it is believed that the Arthropleura was amphibious, at least at some stages of its life cycle. As it grew, it went through molting several times, shedding its shell and temporarily becoming more vulnerable to predators. It is suggested that during the molting period, it may have led a completely aquatic lifestyle, as its many legs became soft and could not carry its massive body. According to another hypothesis, the Arthropleura could wait out this dangerous period in hollows inside the sappy trunks of tree-like leucopsids, club mosses, or in burrows specially dug in wet soil. The Arthropleura had an elongated, flattened body, divided into many segments, each with a pair of extremities. Their close arrangement and structure indicates that representatives of this species were rather slow creatures. Given the weak mandibles and the absence of reservoirs for venom, we can assume that they were not predators. Most likely, these giants, despite their terrifying appearance, fed on dead vegetation and possibly carrion. It is now believed that the Arthropleura and other arthropods of the period grew to such enormous sizes because of the comfortable conditions and lack of competition from other types, such as vertebrates. When, at the beginning of the Permian, the climate became less humid and large areas of near-equatorial land became desert, the Arthropleura and other giant arthropods became naturally extinct. Yet, despite the rapid development of the terrestrial biosphere, most life still favored the sea. The elongated and sinuous coastline of the ancient supercontinent provided vast expanses of ocean shelf, comfortable for a multitude of living things. The abundance of sunlight and nutrients allowed a wide variety of creatures to thrive. One of the most widespread groups in the seas and fresh waters of the ancient Earth were Eurypterids. Interestingly, contrary to what many people believe, these amazing arthropods are not the ancestors of either modern crustaceans or scorpions. They actually represent a separate branch of evolution. And although now we cannot meet them on our planet, they reached the peak of their development in the Carboniferous period. The physical embodiment of these was a monster, the giant Eucalyptus, which grew to be as long as 2.8 meters. Thus, this creature is among the largest known arthropods in the history of our planet. Eurypterids, a genus of extinct arthropods. Period of existence 500 to 250 million years ago. Habitats: freshwater bodies and the ocean shelf. The body of Eurypterids consisted of three main parts: the prosoma, or head, it also contained the eyes; the mesosoma, or trunk, wing-like appendages used for moving around were attached to it; and the metosoma, or abdomen, ending in a tail appendage called the telson. The body structure of these fascinating animals suggests that they were well adapted to an aquatic lifestyle and probably could also come out to land for short periods of time. The hydromechanics of the swimming paddles and caudal fins of the Eucalyptus and related species suggest that they were all capable of hovering in the water, darting forward, and executing rapid turns. In addition, plates of chitin armor of the Eucalyptus were very thin and light in comparison with other arthropods. The only exceptions were strong mineralized claws and massive elongated chelicerae, outgrowths on the front part of the body equipped with powerful claws and spikes for capturing prey. Most likely, these animals were not record breakers in speed, but still they were agile and active predators. They hunted both other arthropods and the fish that populated the waters of the ancient seas in abundance. Despite its titanic size, the Eucalyptus was probably not the heaviest of its kind because of its lightweight exoskeleton. Unfortunately, it is impossible to determine the exact weight of these creatures because of the old age and scarcity of the paleontological finds. We can only compare them using circumstantial evidence, such as its exoskeleton's thickness and general physique. Apparently, the Eucalyptus was lighter than the Hibbertopterus, a massive armored Eurypterid from a neighboring suborder. Its body length was about 180 to 200 centimeters, and its width was even greater than that of its predatory colleague, up to 65 centimeters. Judging by the body structure and location of the remains, the Hibbertopterus most likely led a benthic lifestyle, that is, kept to the bottom, scouring the substrate in search of food, such as mud or small animals. The forelimbs, which had a specific structure, helped it to do this. The grasping limbs of these massive giants were weak and most likely unsuitable for holding prey. It is known that this species was able to move on land, but slowly and clumsily. Paleontologists have found traces of it, which indicate a heavy, dragging motion. Two possibilities are hypothesized as to how these animals could have survived on land. According to the first hypothesis, as long as their gills remained moist, they were able to function in an air environment. Another hypothesis suggests that the Eurypterids may have had a dual respiratory system, meaning they were amphibians. Unfortunately, most of the fossilized remains are shells that have been shed after molting, and it is impossible to determine the details of the internal structure of their carriers. So the question is still open. It is worth noting that most of the diversity of animal and plant life on the ancient Earth was concentrated in a relatively small area along the equator. High humidity and a warm climate were favorable for vast forests to appear on the face of our planet, both similar to and different from those of today. We must remember that the emergence of flowering plants was still several 100 million years away. Therefore, in the forests of the ancient Earth, there were neither juicy kinds of fruits, nor bright flowers, nor insect pollinators. But one could observe an abundance of lush greenery and bizarre trunks. Basically, all these plants were horsetails, lycopods or ferns. For example, almost everywhere there were lepidodendrons, lycopodian trees up to 100 centimeters thick and 10 to 40 meters high. Their trunks and branches were characterized by a specific structure, very thick bark and thin wood. The leaves grew straight out of the bark, without stalks. Once they had served their time, they fell off, leaving peculiar scars on the surface of the tree. They formed a distinctive texture, like the scaly skin of a snake or an alligator. Other giant lycopods, also widespread during this period, are known as sigillaria. These were tall trees with straight trunks, growing mostly in swampy areas. It is noteworthy that the wood of the sigillaria was rather loose and soft, while the bark was much stronger and tougher. This species reached 20–25 meters in height and 1.5 meters in thickness. A significant proportion of the charcoal we use now is the remains of sigillaria bark. Leaving the mainland and traveling to the opposite side of the planet, we would find a vast, majestic ocean. Its waters concealed mountain ranges and chasms thousands of kilometers long, and currents collided with the supercontinent, swirling in giant vortices. It was here that some of the oldest multicellular creatures on our planet, the trilobites, lived. The oldest fossil finds of these creatures are 530 million years old, but their diversity and abundance suggest that trilobites would have appeared much earlier. Although the heyday of this group predates the rapid Meganeura and the terrifying Arthropleura, trilobites lived and evolved for many hundreds of millions of years simultaneously with other branches of evolution. Like the other creatures we have presented, they were arthropods and distant relatives of today's insects. Although most trilobites were relatively small, there were some real giants. For example, in 1999, the largest whole fossil to date, belonging to the species Isotellus rex, was discovered in Minnesota. It is 72 centimeters long and about 40 centimeters wide. However, fragments of other shells suggest that some trilobites were much larger, reaching up to 90 centimeters in length. Trilobites, a class of extinct marine arthropods. Period of existence: 500–250 million years ago. Habitats: ocean depths and the ocean shelf. These creatures did not leave direct descendants, but modern woodlice and Xiphosaura are close to them, both in terms of their evolutionary path and internal structure. With all the diversity of trilobites, their organisms were built on a single principle, fully consistent with the structure of the bodies of arthropods. It is known that these creatures had flattened, segmented bodies covered with a sturdy exoskeleton carapace. Their head was also protected by a strong chitin shield and carried quite developed sensory organs, as well as modified limbs used for food procurement. The tail of trilobites was shorter than the body and ended in a sharp spike. On the lower part of the body there were the legs and the mouth, which indicates that these creatures led mainly a benthic lifestyle. However, both free-swimming and burrowing species are known. In addition, some fossilized prints have tentacles, which are not common among today's arthropods. A significantly distinguishing feature of trilobites is their eyes. It is known that these creatures' vision was well developed, and their optical organs consisted of many separate simple eyes. Such eyes are called faceted or compound eyes and are characteristic of all today's arthropods. However, trilobites' vision had its own unique features. In the absolute majority of today's animals, the lens is made up of crystallin, a set of solid proteins specific to different species. But in the case of trilobites, the lens was mineral and made up of calcium carbonate, also known as calcite. In nature, large beds of this mineral form deposits of limestone and marble. At present, only brittle sea stars and the mollusk chitin are known to have mineral eyes, but their organs of vision are much more primitive. It is known that different subspecies of trilobites fed on different food. Some fed on silt, others on plankton, others yet were predators, despite the lack of powerful jaws. Also, most representatives of this group were able to curl up, hiding the soft abdomen inside a strong shell. Still, despite all their diversity, trilobites were not the only inhabitants of the ancient seas. At the same time with them, there lived one of the first known super-predators of the planet, a monster called Anomalocaris. These creatures belonged to the now extinct class of Dinocarida, very close to today's arthropods in their evolutionary path and resembling giant shrimp in appearance. The largest specimens of the Anomalocaris reached 38 centimeters in length, not counting the elongated frontal appendages and fan-like tail. Along the entire body they had swimming flaps, allowing the animal to move quickly and nimbly in the aquatic environment. Also, these creatures had large, sensitive eyes with a complex structure. On the front part of the body, they had powerful grasping limbs. All these facts indicate that the Anomalocaris was a fast and agile active predator, a real storm of the ancient seas. It is believed that the Anomalocaris propelled itself in the water by making undulating movements with the flexible flaps on the sides of its body. Modeling shows that this type of movement is internally stable and does not require a highly developed nervous system to maintain synchrony and balance. The Anomalocaris also had well-developed faceted eyes that allowed it to detect prey. The study of fossil remains showed that there were about 16,000 lenses in the eye of this animal, while today's fly has 4 times less. It is extremely surprising how such an ancient creature could have such a developed visual system. The findings suggest that the Anomalocaris had an unusual disc-shaped mouth, known as a mouth cone. It consisted of several plates arranged in a circle with a pronounced triangular symmetry. 3 plates were the largest. Between them, there were 3 to 4 medium-sized plates, and between those, in turn, there were several very small ones. Most of these teeth plates were wrinkled and had scaly tubercles near the mouth opening, most likely serving for a more secure grip on food. The generally accepted hypothesis states that the Anomalocaris was an active predator, but most likely it fed only on soft-bodied prey. This is evidenced in particular by the absence of mineralized body parts with which the Anomalocaris could destroy strong shells. Apart from that, fossils of the grasping appendages show no traces of wear and abrasion, which means that they were not used to break hard shells. Nevertheless, based on the analysis of the body mechanics of this animal, it was suggested that the Anomalocaris could break the exoskeleton of its prey using a special technique. To do this, it would supposedly grasp the front part of the caught animal with its mouth and rock its rear part with its frontal appendages. This caused the chitin plates of the prey to collapse at the joints, and the predator could get to the soft and nutritious innards. Despite its size and good adaptability, the Anomalocaris became extinct towards the end of the Cambrian period. Climate change and the increasing competition from other species are thought to have been the cause. The planet was changing, and life was changing with it. The age of giant insects ended on an apocalyptic note. The great mass extinction in which 96% of marine species and about 80% of terrestrial species were wiped out. This extinction also hit insects hard. 83% of all species of this class, including the giants, disappeared off the face of the Earth. The vacated living space offered opportunities for new forms to develop. Of course, insects and other arthropods did not disappear. For hundreds of millions of years, they continued to evolve, giving rise to new, ever more perfect and adapted forms. Nature no longer produced such titanic and terrifying creatures in this group as before. In their place came other giants, first dinosaurs and then mammals. However, they well deserve a separate journey.